So when I listen to you, I'm like, that's what opened me up, right? And it just, from there, you learn life, get family, you get issues, problems happen, you're like, yeah, okay. What he says makes a lot of sense. Even when I was young, it made a lot of sense. Yeah.
Right, so many people would imagine that Larry Elder would be a pariah among other black people because he's so critical of what's accepted in the mainstream culture.
The way I look at Larry is either it's true or it's not. You could take whatever political affiliation and it really doesn't matter. You have to always evaluate, is what he's saying true or not true? I've been listening to Larry since the OJ trials, and that's where I got to know him. And everything he said made common sense. So common sense and truth is where it really boils down to. And there's a lot of things that people talk about or don't acknowledge. There's a lot of victimhood, and Larry addresses that. So a lot of things people don't want to hear because it's easier to blame issues and problems on other things. But truth is truth, and we have to acknowledge that. Particularly as black people, we have to acknowledge what's going on in our neighborhoods.
What about the blame of systemic racism?
Yeah. Well, again, it's another systemic race. There is racism, but not to the degree that people make it out to be. Again, when you have to acknowledge what's true and what's not. And unfortunately, people like to live in victimization. And that's unfortunate because when you live that way, you can't be free. You free your minds to accept, the realities of life. So again, a way I look at, I grew up in Inglewood, I grew up in LA, I grew up in South Central, Central. I grew up in South LA, I should say. So I saw a lot of the homes there was the absence of fathers in the home. At the time I grew up, there weren't as many single-parent household, but that exploded in the black community. I also do prison ministry where I am talking to those men from the city who are now in jail, and 85% of them have no father in the home. And I grew up in the same neighborhoods where they were gang infested, and when you are in a drug or gang infested neighborhood, and you have no black male figure, you're going to be in prison. And I see those guys all the time in prison ministry because that's what I do with my retired life.
But who would you attribute that to? Is it the mother's responsibility if she can't get a guy who wants to marry her and her kids?
It's complicated, but I think a lot of it's just a culture that it's acceptable to have kids, to have a baby without a man. It's part of the culture, and unfortunately. A lot of people in our neighborhood have brought into the lie that you can have a kid and you don't need a man, and unfortunately you can marry the state and the state can take care of you.
So how much more common is the idea of girls or women having children without a husband or father present compared to just families that get divorced and the father's not around? Compared to where a family gets divorced and the kids were born in that condition, in that circumstance, compared to when women just say, well, I'm going to have a baby by myself.
Well, yeah. Well, right now it's more women thinking, I'm just going to have a baby. They want a kid. It makes up for a lot of things. And it really takes two parents to raise a household. But if you're unfortunately, what's being fed into the culture, all the culture, black, white, Hispanic, that you don't need to have a two-parent family, that the male figure is not important. So it's really become accepted to, and unfortunately, particularly in the black neighborhoods, that you don't really need a male figure, and that you can have it all, and that you can have a baby, and that's totally acceptable in the culture because it has crept into the culture and it's part of the culture now. And it's all through, and young kids, they listen to rap music. I mean, they're listening to those lyrics that are horrendous, and they're growing up not having babies because that's what they're indoctrinated. There's a lot of indoctrination, and there's woke indoctrination going on now. Unfortunately, a lot of young black kids are indoctrinated with rap music that tells them these things are acceptable.
Well, what's it like being a black conservative or Republican? What's it like being a black Republican among other blacks who
Very
may.
interesting. Well, very interesting because I don't like to argue with people, but a lot of it's just observing what people say, and just like kind of like I was talking to Larry, just stating truth. Like, hey, rather than to get confrontational with them, I'm like, well, how's it going in your neighborhood in LA now? How's the crime going, right? Get them to talk, right? Or do you agree with what's going? Do you agree with the high prices we pay? Do you agree to the fact in California we pay twice as much for gas as people in other states? Is that okay with you? Have you been to downtown LA lately? Well, I mean, you know what I mean? So you ask those questions and like, well, who did you vote for? So when you take that approach, then now people have to talk or debate with you without the emotions. But the minute you say, "Oh, I'm a black conservative Republican," they get, all these images, and that's fine. But you should be able to debate on facts and issues.
Where do you prison chaplain?
Oh, I'm not a chaplain. I belong to a prison ministry, and so I belong to Kairos Prison Ministry, and we are at Kairos Prison Ministry. It's an international prison ministry team. And we are I belong, and the different teams are dedicated to different prisons. So in California, we're in probably 20 prisons in California, everywhere from San Quentin to, California City. So I serve the team that goes to California City State Prisons, a level 2, Salinas Valley State Prisons, a level 4, and Lompoc Federal Prison. So I'm on several different prisons. It's what I've done since I've been retired.
What do you think about the recruiting for conversion to Islam in the prisons?
Well, there's a lot of people out there that would like to convert. Again, and prison's a very vulnerable place, so a lot of people would like to blame things that they maybe didn't do. A lot of people were in the business selling drugs and everything, and that's what got them into prison. And if they can, and they're vulnerable, so they can buy into a lot of things.
But would a prisoner need to convert to Islam necessarily for protection?
In prison, a lot of people convert, or they affiliate with a lot of different associations for protection. So it's not just Islam, it's more racial than anything, because in prison it's probably the most racially divided place on planet Earth. So people associate with various gangs or various races for protection. That's just the law of prison.
So if someone is black and they get into prison, are they obliged really for protection to go along with?
It depends on the level of security in prison. Fairly high level security prisons, sometimes they have to find an affiliation to stay protected. Medium state prisons, not so much. Low to medium federal prisons, not so much. You can do your time on your own. Once you start getting into fairly high level security prisons, it becomes more prison politics and more gang affiliations and more race affiliations. But pretty much everybody that I talk to, and I go to a lot of them, when you talk to them, they're very open with me and we talk a lot. But when you start getting into their home life, imagine being a 5-year-old and daddy hands you a gun at 5-year-old. People in the gang lifestyle but the majority of them had no male in their families. They had no male figure. So again, when we come into that prison, you have 40 men come in there. That's what attracts them, because there's a positive male that they never had when they were young.
Now, what do you think of the policies of the district attorney Gascon in not prosecuting?
Oh, it's horrible. Well, again, it's horrible because the way you protect society is to put people away who don't belong in society. I do prison ministry, but I'm not sympathetic to people who want to kill and destroy. So, no, you have. What about the victim? So you have to protect society, and you have to protect victims. So, no, what Gascon is doing is he's systematically destroying the city of LA, and uninformed voters are allowing him to do that. So no, that can't happen. Yes, people can change, and I'm part of that in the prison ministry, but they'll be the first ones to tell you, the people in prison, that that they are there for a reason. And if you're letting them out, then they think they can take advantage of that. So that's the game they play.